All right, Ren, well, let's kick it off. What are we going to cover in today's episode?
So this episode's all about why super. We're going to make the case that it's something worth caring about, and we're going to tell you why.
Simon Sinek, why?
I don't get the reference.
You know Simon Sinek?
I know the name. He's like a motivational speaker guy.
Yeah.
Jeez, we're off track early in this episode.
Sorry, he's the guy who put up the bit, the circle that for business leaders to think about, and the crux of everything is the why.
All this stuff is like star signs for business people. It's like it's corporate woo-woo.
Yeah, anyway, sorry, I did derail that. But anyway, let's get back to track.
Right,
Why super?
Jeez, people are going to hate me saying that. All right, we're going to make the case why you need to care about super. We're going to talk about why super should be thought of as a tool and it's a means to an end.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about why it's the only free kick you get in finance. Why we're going to talk about the fact that too many Aussies aren't engaged, and there's some pretty surprising stats. And then finally, we're going to talk about why super is the foundation of retirement.
So nothing new in here, but a great reminder for why we should be paying attention to super.
Yeah, but I think the foundation of good investing returns and the foundation of good superannuation is reminding yourself of the things that you need to remind yourself of and doing them consistently over and over again.
And this is timely.
And sometimes that means covering the same content.
Yes, absolutely. And it's timely as well because on my to-do list is a review of my super because I think it's always important, as we'll get to.
Definitely.
But let's start with the super is a tool.
Yeah.
We often talk about superannuation in the context and environment of finance and investing. But the reality is superannuation is just a means to an end.
Yeah.
Us getting to retirement and living a long and happy life.
Yeah. It's the end is the retirement that you want at the time you want it.
Yeah.
And in the same way that you don't sell a mortgage on the features of that product, you sell it on the dream of home ownership.
Yeah.
Like we need to start thinking about super, and people need to start talking about super in the context of a comfortable retirement or choice in retirement rather than on the intricacies of the financial product and the investment choices, because like nothing turns people who aren't interested in investing off more than that.
I feel like that's why so many people put it in the basket of I don't need to worry about it now because retirement is so far away, and also it's a finance product and it's a little bit confusing and I don't understand that world, so I'm not going to have a conversation about it. But the reality is, as you said, Ren, people are engaged in their mortgage and trying to understand that because they have the dream and aspiration of owning a home. The same sort of feeling and I guess dedication towards understanding a financial product should go towards your superannuation.
Yeah.
This is going to be your nest egg at retirement, and the difference between retiring comfortably and with the life that you want, and perhaps realizing too late in life that you should have paid attention to it 20 years earlier.
For me, the biggest thing is the when as well. So Vanguard have done a study that we'll include in the show notes for all these episodes, and that we've pulled a number of stats from, which has been really helpful in prepping this episode.
Yes.
But they found that they spoke to a number of people across all age demographics, but zooming in on people aged 18 to 34, the average person in that age bracket wanted to retire by 59 and a half years old.
Very weird. Okay.
And for me, the big thing is like we can all achieve our retirement goals, and we'll talk to some of the numbers that really illustrate that. But the most important thing is that you really need to give yourself a solid, call it 30 years at least, to let compounding do its thing, put money away. Ideally, for people who are in their 20s and 30s, you can give it 40 years. But like you really need to give it a good run. Like it's hard to play catch up if you're only thinking about it when you've got 10 years to go until you want to retire. And so for me, the biggest reason that you want to think about the retirement that you want and when you want to retire when you're in your 20s and 30s is because you will then give yourself more choice about the when.
Yeah. It's hard to conceptualize the retirement that you want when you're in your 20s.
100%.
It's very hard to do. All you need to conceptualize though is you want as much money as possible.
All for me, all you want to conceptualize is you're going to want choice.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
choice, as much as it sucks that money is so important to choice, it just is the reality of the system that we are in.
Yeah.
And it is a reality.
Here's a question for you. When did you, can you remember when you genuinely started thinking properly about your superannuation?
Yeah. When I started working at Coles
Yep.
in my first grad job, which coincided with around the time we started this podcast.
Yeah, okay. So
Like
we were
2017.
2017.
Yeah, so I would have been like 25, 26.
25,
Yeah.
26. Yeah.
And like thinking about it seriously really was just, it was choosing a fund that had good performance, but really for me at that time it was like low cost, and consolidating my super. And we'll talk about how you can consolidate your super. It is the easiest thing to do. But that was a big one because, you know, I'd worked part-time jobs at bars and retail and, you know, different places and sort of had super everywhere.
Yeah.
And so consolidating it and just putting it in one fund that I was comfortable with
Yeah.
was literally the extent of me thinking seriously about super.
Yeah.
And that's really all most people need to do early in their career. In the third episode of this series, we're going to talk about super through the ages and in each decade of your life, some things that you should be thinking about and should be doing. So we'll get into that in more detail. But this isn't an arduous thing to start with. Like you're outsourcing it to a fund. So like it's just about setting it up right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's move on to why super, which is the whole point of this episode. And we want to start with the fact that it is a free kick or the only free kick when it comes to your finances. It is an incredibly powerful free kick when you get a reduced tax rate.
Yeah.
This is a tax efficient finance vehicle.
Yeah. So what we mean by that, so for most people, their marginal tax rate, the tax that they pay on the last dollar that they earn, is going to be either 32.5% or 37%. Some people who are killing it, that last dollar might be taxed at 45%.
Yes.
But that's sort of the range that the average Australian is getting taxed at. Superannuation, your contributions below the concessional cap, so there's a certain amount that you can contribute each year, that gets taxed at 15%. And it might not feel like there's that much, 15%, 32%, like what's the difference? But trust us, that difference compounds and that difference adds up, and it can often add up to significantly more or less choice in retirement.
Well, we've run the numbers here that show the difference, or show the impact that this compounding effect can have year over year, and the differences between the 15% and the marginal or the tax rates that we currently have for our income tax. So do you want to work through some examples, Ren?
So according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the median weekly earning in Australia is $1,300. The super guarantee is currently 11%. So that's $143 a week, 11% of $1,300. So we've just said, all right, well, what does that look like if taxed at 15% or taxed at 32.5%? So if taxed at 15%, you're left with $122 a week to invest. Let's say it's for 30 years at 8% annual returns. That's kind of like the broad market average. You've got $789,000 after 30 years.
Yeah.
If that money was taxed at 32.5% instead, same inputs, 30 years, 8%, you've got $628,000. So that's a difference of $161,000. Or put another way, you miss out on 20% of your returns if you're taxed at the 32.5% marginal tax rate.
Wow.
So that is like a 20% free kick that you're getting from the tax advantage of super.
Yeah.
And that means a lot in retirement.
It means a heap. It's just another, this is just why you need to pay attention to this.
Now, you can change the assumptions and the core fact remains the same. Let's say rather than 30 years at 8%, we said 40 years at 10%.
Yeah.
If you invested that $122 a week at 40 years at 10%, $3.35 million.
Wow.
Yeah, that extra 10 years is massive for compounding, which is why, again, we say starting early is so important. Because if you can go...
So to relate that back to the number that you said earlier, 30 years, albeit the compound rate is a little bit less, but you had 789,000.
Yeah.
An additional 10 years, slightly higher return
return,
each
yeah.
year, you're up at 3.35 million.
Yeah. And that's why we say two things. The time is on your side because, like, the longer you extend the time horizon, the compounding is exponential. But also that fees matter because you see there the difference between 8% a year and 10% a year.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like a massive difference, but it is.
Yeah.
And if you have a choice between paying 2% in fees and 1% in fees, like it compounds.
Huge compound.
So to get to the end of my example, $122 a week, 40 years, 10%, 3.35 million. $97 a week, 40 years, 10% per annum, 2.66 million. So that's a difference of about $690,000 or about 21% of your returns. So really, like, that's a lot of numbers to throw at you. And if you didn't keep up, that's okay, because the key takeaway is super is a free kick. That lower tax rate on the concessional contributions means that you can invest more, and that more can compound year after year after year. And so you want to make sure that that money that you're putting there, that your employer is putting there on your behalf, is in the right environment and is not getting, too much taken away in fees and is getting good performance, because it's the only free kick you get. So you got to take advantage of it. And it also means that as you start thinking about additional contributions over time, that's why additional contributions can be so powerful, because you can make the free kick bigger.
Yeah. And if you're struggling to kind of comprehend, it's just think about this. If your employer comes to you and says, I'm going to take 11% of your income every time I pay you, I'm not going to tell you what I do with it because you're not engaged. Like, how do you feel about that? Like, you should want to know exactly what your employer is doing with that.
I mean, make it more personal. Like, let's say that you're young and you're still living at home, and your parents say to you, "I'm taking 11% of your pay and I'm going to invest it, but I'm not going to tell you anything about it."
Yeah.
You'd be like, "No, it's my money. I've earned it. Tell me about it."
Yeah, exactly.
Do the same for your super fund.
Do the same, yes. And if all you do in your investing life is focus on your superannuation, that is fine.
Yeah.
Because it is set up, as Ren said, for a free kick, tax advantages here. It is a vehicle to help you grow wealth as best as possible over a long period of time. Welcome back to Equity Mates and our series on superannuation supported by Vanguard. Ren, we've spoken about why superannuation is a super tool, why it is the only free kick in your finances. But this is the interesting part. We're going to have a chat now about why Aussies aren't, or the extent to which Aussies aren't engaged. And you've got some alarming figures.
To be honest, I thought the first half was interesting, but I'll take that feedback on board.
Know, it is interesting, but I guess this is the part that really brings to light the work that is to be done to get everyone up and about when it comes to super. Yeah,
because I think, as we were talking about that, those free kicks, like for people like us who do a finance podcast and think about it for a living, like we're very well aware of the benefits of super and the reason it's so important. And I'm sure a lot of people listening, especially for Equity Mates that have been listening for a while, they would also be very well aware, and super's probably well set up. But this is our call for those that have got it set up: engage a mate.
Yeah.
As much as you don't want to bring up super at a barbecue or at the pub, too many Aussies are missing out. They're not engaged, and the stats are alarming.
I would even say the stats show that there's a large portion of the Equity Mates community that fall into this bucket. So let's go through some.
Yeah. So these numbers come from Vanguard's study.
Yep.
1 in 2 working age Australians have either not made contact with their super fund in the last 12 months or never made contact at all. Now, made contact here, the definition of it includes any form of engagement, so it could be a phone call or an email.
Yeah.
But more importantly, accessing the super fund's website includes it.
That's contact?
Yeah.
Made contact?
Yeah. So
actively thinking about it and going, oh, I should have a look at Vanguard Super Fund.
Yeah. So 1 in 2 working age Aussies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So like that is the extent of
That's
the
where you
disengagement.
start. I mean, come
Yeah.
on.
But that's not the only stat.
Yeah.
1 in 4 don't know what their super balance is.
What?
Yeah. What's your super balance?
I could tell you, but for the purposes of I know what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's for me. It is something that I check not as regularly as my portfolio, but every quarter I'm looking at it.
Nice. I check it daily. First thing when I wake up. No, I check it. I check it quite regularly,
Yeah.
or like, probably more than once a quarter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I feel it's something. It's a balance that you will check more and more as you get older and older.
Definitely.
Like I know
Yeah,
my
yeah,
uncle
yeah.
when he got to he'll often talk about how he's checking the super balance up and down, up and down. You're like, oh, I don't want to be at that point.
Yeah. But that's not the only stat. This is one that is close to our heart. We have a policy here at Equity Mates that we hate fees.
Yeah.
And when it comes to super, as I was saying earlier with those worked examples, those seemingly small differences in fees compounded over a long period of time make a massive difference. How's this stat? Half of Australians don't know what they pay in annual fees in super.
Wow. So you've got half who don't even check or engage with their super fund in any way.
To be honest, it's probably the same half that don't know what they pay in
There's
fees.
another 50% also don't know what they're paying in fees,
Yeah.
which I think is the most crucial thing to understand. And then a quarter of us don't know our super balances.
Yes. Yeah.
I think interestingly, is as part of that as well, like the fourth one that I would add in there is you should also know what your super fund is invested in. And I think by looking at your fees and looking at your balance, you're likely to start going down the rabbit hole of what am I actually investing in?
Yeah.
So
at the very least, even if it's not like you don't know the particular assets, at the very least, are you growth, conservative,
yes.
balanced?
Yeah. Like, are you actually set up? And we'll talk about this in the third episode, but are you set in the right type of super fund structure and investment portfolio for your age?
Yeah.
The fees is a good one because I went in my most recent review just to remind myself, and there are a few funny ways that they present fees, administration fees, assets under management. So you definitely need to pay attention. So finally, superannuation is the foundation of your retirement, which is probably the biggest why at the end of the day. Like it is time to engage with your super because, as we said at the top, this is going to dictate the choice, the enjoyment that you have in retirement.
Yeah. I mean, and look, if I can get a little bit political and a little bit cynical here, like the foundation of our grandparents' retirement, like those that have retired now, is the booming Australian property market, owning their own home, not having their own home count to the pension assets test, and the age pension. And then also, like they didn't really grow up in an era where super was a thing. It only came in the 90s. Our parents are a generation where most of their working lives, they had super, but not all.
Yeah.
Like we're really, the generation that's probably a little bit younger than our parents will be the first generation to retire fully on super.
Yeah.
And there is no doubt, this is controversial to say, but there is no doubt in my mind that as future governments get to a world where they have that people retiring have had a full working life of super, there will be budgetary pressure to change the way that the age pension is managed, to change the way that the asset test looks at things like the fully owned home. Changes will come. The population pyramid doesn't support the current level of government support for retirees. By the time we retire, it's going to be a lot more you're on what you build
super.
over your working life is the foundation of your retirement. And that means your super is the foundation of it. And then you build on it with, maybe you own a house that you've paid off. Maybe you've got investments outside of super. But like in my mind, and like this is my personal view, there's going to be more of a level of self-reliance expected when we retire than those who have currently retired. And I think whether I am right or wrong, we need to think about super as the foundation of our retirement rather than any other thing that may exist.
I don't disagree with that.
Mm.
Yeah, I think we're going to have some pretty healthy super balances, particularly if you start paying attention to it
Yeah,
now.
definitely.
And it'll be a major carrot being dangled in front of the government to say everyone's sitting on some pretty decent sized piles of cash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to be really clear. I don't think that's a bad thing. In many ways, I actually think that's a good thing. The challenge for the government and for super funds and I mean for finance podcasters is to get people engaged in their super now because its importance is only going to grow over the coming decades. And that's the message that we really need to get across. Super is the foundation of our retirements. Our great-grandparents and our grandparents had a defined benefits system. They got paid pensions by their companies and then by the government. We are moving to a world of defined contributions where when you're working, you put money here in Australia in your super fund, in America in your 401k, in the UK in your lifetime ISA. New Zealand has one which I forgot the name of, but my point is Western governments around the world are all moving in the same direction, and that is defined contributions, build your nest egg, and then that is your foundation for retirement.
Yeah, love it. Well, a final stat to close out from the Vanguard study, and it's a good news story. When we overestimate what we think we're going to need in retirement, the Vanguard study shows that 50% of working age Australians want to retire with a yearly income significantly higher than the yearly income that is actually required by older generations. Now, keeping in mind, I assume this takes into consideration that you own your own home, you're not paying down debt and those sorts of things.
This also takes into account inflation.
And inflation.
Yeah. So, because obviously we're going to need to spend more than current retirees, but they've adjusted for inflation in this study.
So the study shows that we would like to have $99,000 per year
in today's dollars,
to retire, where in reality only $68,000 per year is required
for the average
retiree.
Yeah.
Now you can look up, and we've spoken about it on the show before. You can look up what people define as comfortable retirement and how much you need to retire comfortably. And yes, the good news is the figures are not out of reach.
It's one of the most common questions we get at Equity Mates. And to be honest, it is the most common question I have when I'm thinking about my super. Like I kind of want like a big shiny number that I can just chase. So there is another way to think about the end goal. And like we all would love a big shiny number that we can just put up in lights and chase and say that's what we need to achieve. But it's hard to know. It's hard to know what the value of money will be because of inflation when we retire. It's hard to know who we will be when we retire, what our family situations will be. So it can be often hard to say, this is the big shiny number you need to chase. So another way to think about it is your replacement rate. And retirement planners sort of talk about getting to a point where you're generating income from your investments that is equal to between 66 and 80% of your pre-retirement income. So for ease of maths, let's say you're earning $100,000 a year in income. You want to get to, earning sort of $80,000 a year in income. That's 80% of 100,000.
Yeah.
And so that can be another way to think about it. How much income can my portfolio and my superannuation, the investments that are in super now, but then I'll pull out of super when I retire, how much income can they generate and what does that look like relative to my current salary?
Yeah.
And you sort of aim for between 66 and 80%. And once you've got there, you can say, all right, well, I'm feeling like I'm pretty retirement ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's instead of chasing that hard, I'm going to get to $1 million. Yeah. Hard figure.
And like those two numbers can correlate because in retirement planning, there's a 4% rule and you sort of say that you can safely draw down 4% of your nest egg each year and you won't run out of money over a 30-year period. And so you could sort of say, well, if $80,000 is my 4%, then 80,000 times 25 gets me to 100%. 80,000 times 25 is 80,000.
2 million.
Oh, that was actually so easy. 4% of $1 million is 40,000. Yeah, okay. $2 million is what you're chasing.
Yeah.
So then you got a big number in
Then
lights
you've
again.
gotta
It's all related.
Yeah, it's all
But look,
related.
however you want to think about it, and 2 million can feel out of reach, but go to the Money Smart superannuation calculator
do the figures.
and put the numbers in,
Yeah.
and you start to see that if you give yourself 30 or 40 years, it's a lot more achievable than you probably think.
Yeah, well, especially we are contributing money, 11% of your income every single time you're paid. Like, you are literally dollar cost averaging for 40 years, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
So pay attention to what you're doing. Get on the right side of the numbers. Get on the right side of the stats, I should say. Really think about the fact and the tax advantages, the fact that superannuation is a free kick. And as we said, if there's anything you do this year, if you don't feel like you know enough to engage in investing outside of superannuation, or that all your money is tied up in paying off your mortgage and cost of living, that is completely fine, because you can still make meaningful change in your superannuation fund right now by jumping on the website and having a look at what you're invested in, have a look at your fees, understand, more than just you're putting money into a default super fund that your employer has chosen for you. So yeah, pay attention.
So while you're doing that big wrap-up spiel, I just put it into the compound interest calculator.
Yeah.
$122 a week, which is what we said.
Yep.
The median earnings, $1,300 a week, 11% of that, less 15% tax, 122.
Yes.
122 a week for 40 years at 8%, 1.85 million.
There you go.
So, it's achievable.
It is absolutely true.
And, if you're thinking, oh, well, have I left it too late? Like the good answer is no, because the free kick is still available to you, and you can juice the free kick by doing additional contributions. And it's not as far out of reach as you think it is. And that's what really we're going to be covering in the next 2 episodes of this Superannuation Week here on Equity Mates.